I'm Chris Murphy.
And I'm Jennifer Logan.
And we're the Community Theater Heroes.
We host a weekly podcast where we interview theater companies,
actors,
casting directors,
playwrights,
composers,
and other theater artists to give our listeners helpful advice, tips, and insight for their own careers.
And life in general, because we believe that live theater has the power to make the world a better place.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 6 of the Community Theater Heroes podcast. In this episode, we interview Rusty Tennant and Ernie Lijoi.
Ernie and Rusty talk about their upcoming production, Cabaret, and Ernie speaks about the Outright Festival and Fuse's upcoming 10-year celebration.
10 years strong.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, we have Rusty Tennant.
And Ernie Lijoi.
Oh, you got it right.
That is right. We practiced like 5 times before we hit record. It was ridiculous. Thank you guys so much for being down here at the Funhouse.
Thank you for having us. Yeah,
especially after your long evenings.
Yeah. Not together.
I want to make that clear.
I'm going to sound like Elaine Stritch today.
Darling.
What were you doing last night? You were at a punk?
Limp Wrist, who's kind of a legendary queercore punk band, was in town. A friend of ours is a guitarist, and so when they're in town, we try to get to go see him. Scott Moore is a guitarist, and yeah, I mean, it was at Bossa Nova. It was a huge crowd. It was easily the most amazing mosh pit I've seen in years. It was just a blast.
Nice.
Like, it was super cool to watch the kids press the flesh with one another.
Press the flesh.
That's what we called moshing in my day. It's an industrial term. It's an industrial term. But yeah, it was super cool to kind of be a part of that and have fun with those people until like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
It's like 9:30 now.
I know. He opened for us. That's so nice.
And Ernie started a new job.
Oh, yeah. I went back to school. I used to be a software engineer for like 20 years, and I just decided to do something different, and I went back to a medical program, and now I'm a respiratory therapist working in a hospital because I wanted to be a doctor, so this is sort of like Dr. Light.
Yeah.
And yet they still found the time to come down here.
I know.
And they find the time to do theater.
So much
Somehow.
theater. Oh, yeah. So the first time I ever saw you both was...
Under the Influence?
Nope.
Sordid Lives?
Sordid Lives.
Yes, Sordid Lives. It was Sordid Lives, and amazing stuff, by the way.
Oh,
and then I saw You're Under the Influence, and I actually accosted him. I hope you don't remember it. There was one day that I was hanging out with Adriana, and something had happened, a boy problem or something, and we both got we both got really upsettingly inebriated. And so we had to stay put for several hours, and he walked in with someone, and I borderline jumped on top
Yeah, we were in Mississippi somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
I loved Under the Influence. I loved it so much. Can I just hug you?
I was like, please, man, please stop screaming.
I told them you were a huge fan before you came.
Didn't
I
wanna
got that
go.
out of the way.
Oh,
And I felt like Sally Field and So Bitch. I'm like, I want to be recognized in public by my fans.
They love you. They really, really love you.
such good work. So, how did you guys meet?
Long pause. No, okay. There's nothing unsavory about that, even though the pause would indicate so. Well, there is something unsavory about it, but we didn't actually.
But that never happened.
When I decided to move out here from New York about 3.5 years ago, we had a friend in common, and I was like, I need to get out of New York. I want to go someplace where I can do theater and produce my own musicals because you can't do that stuff in New York.
Why not?
Because it's just impossible. Okay. And also, just
prohibitive too.
And just to exist there, I was working my ass off all the time. I had a great job, but you're working 60 hours a week. When do you have time to produce and do theater? Yeah. That's another reason why I went back to school. I wanted a job that gave me some life balance.
Yeah.
And the cost of living here is so much lower. So anyway, I think it was Julian Christopher introduced us.
Julian has also been involved with Outright for years. Julian was a playwright that we've brought in probably 3 or 4 times now at this stage of the game. Always comes out and watches the readings of his plays. One of his plays, probably 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, we did was Animals Commit Suicide, which was a play about bug chasing.
Yeah.
And it just like, it was, we packed the house at Artist Rep with it. It was a really, really, for a reading, kind of like this amazing moment for the festival itself. So, yeah, Julian's always been a part of Outright anyway, and he knew that Ernie was moving out here. He knew that I was out here, obviously, and he's like, I can't believe you two don't already know each other. And then
So we just started chatting online at the same time too, and this is kind of funny and a little bit embarrassing for me, but he was doing this televisions thing called Rune, where you were playing a Viking, and he had grown his beard all the way down here, and I'm like, so I saw a picture online, and I'm like, I have such a beard fetish. I'm like, I'm in love. But then we came out here.
And we met and we were like, what's up, girl? Hey, how you doing? Yeah.
Literally the first day I was here.
Musicals.
The first day I was here, truck pulls away, I'm standing around boxes, and he calls me up, he goes, someone just quit the play that I'm doing, want to be in it? And I'm like, just got here, but okay. And so our first experience together was we were either going to either have sex or do theater together, and we chose theater.
Theater.
Wise decision.
It's probably been infinitely more productive.
And the rest is history.
No, but we just got along so well. We tend to complement each other. The things that I do well, and the things that he does well, and the things that we both don't do well, we fill in the gaps for each other. You know.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you work together for Sordid Lives. You're pairing up again for Cabaret. And then what was Fuse a part of Trumped Up? Or?
Yeah.
Fuse
produced it.
We produced it, yeah.
Nice. So what else have you guys done
Did
together?
the Last Days with Post 5.
Yeah.
We did...
The original production of Under the Influence. That was the second production of it. We revised it and did a lot of editing to, insult the president as much as we could.
As much as
Very
we could.
appropriate editing.
Yeah. I think that's it as far as shows in town, right?
Nice.
You were in Baby, but I wasn't a part of that.
I was in Jesus Christ
Superstar. I wasn't a part of that.
But we've also done the Outright stuff, so there's always been
there's
readings
and things like
Can
that.
you tell me about the Outright stuff? And
Yeah, we've
the
heard a lot
listeners
about it.
I don't.
Yes, the Outright Festival is in its 6th year. It was created to be a celebration of the LGBTQI plus contribution to theater, but it's also over the years turned into an incubator for new work.
Nice.
I've focused that in different directions. A lot of times I try to bring in one person from another city if I can and do their work, and then I also tried to make sure that as many Portland-based queer artists get their opportunity to have a reading of their work. I've had plays read in it. I think, we did Under the Influence originally as a reading.
No, we did a full production. We did a reading in Fertile Ground.
Fertile Ground Festival, but it was outright producing in the Fertile Ground Festival.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of this arm of Fuse Theatre Ensemble. It's definitely my pet project within the ensemble itself, and it literally was meant to be something that would give a voice and give a platform to queer artists here in Portland.
Nice.
And we've been moderately successful at
I've heard
it.
great things,
Yeah, I mean the festival continues to grow every year.
Sordid
Every
Lives
year
did great last year.
Yeah,
They
every year
really
we've
did,
tried to make it a bigger production or a bigger festival in general. It's taken a few different forms over the years, but this year we're attempting truly our first scripted musical. Obviously, we did Under the Influence, and that was scripted, but it wasn't something that we had to invest a lot of royalties in. It's a small cast when it all comes down to it. It's not Cabaret. So.
Well, speaking of Cabaret, how did you guys choose Cabaret? Cabaret, for the people who don't know, is the upcoming production that you guys are working together with, and that ticket sales go
April
on
1st.
April 1st.
Don't be a fool.
Yeah.
Don't be a fool.
Well, I mean,
That's me. That's my marketing, y'all.
we wanted to do something that had a lot of appeal to it. People love that show. I mean, it's got a huge cult following. People love it, but it also it's a show about Nazi Germany pre World War II, and there's a lot of parallels of what's going on right now in our culture, and so. It has a lot of relevance.
Yeah.
It's an important thing, because I have two different missions in my mind when I'm thinking about this. There's the Fuse Theatre Ensemble mission, which is very much about daring, daring our audiences, daring the colleagues that we work with and collaborate and so on. So there's that component, and then there's this Outright Theater Festival component, which again I've been trying to build, and so I needed something that would exceed the Sordid Lives success and I needed something that would also satisfy that Fuse component of being walking an edge, you know what I mean? Being something that is provocative, being and Cabaret just we wrestled for a long time.
We looked for a lot of shows
and trying to think about things, and I applied for a bunch of rights for things that I couldn't get or didn't get, and ultimately I was just like, duh, Cabaret, what the hell? Yeah. And then I applied for it and got the rights. Amazingly, got the rights. I thought for certain somebody else was already going to be doing this.
And beyond the Nazi politics of it that are relevant to today, there's also, because it's outright, it has a queer component to it. There's a lot of gender fluidity in it, and we're going to probably amp that up and underline some of that.
Well, and particularly the '98 version was actually sculpted or rewritten. I don't want to say that too much, but yeah, it was reimagined to make the discussions of Cliff's sexuality a lot more gay.
Right.
Maybe bisexual, but definitely verging into that end of the spectrum.
And the Emcee character, they made him a lot more fluid, a lot less.
And that's who you're playing.
Yeah,
right? The Emcee.
The Emcee. Yeah. There's an irony there too. My show Under the Influence. Irony. There was the irony of that is my show Under the Influence, which you saw. I crafted the Emcee in that show. After the Emcee,
I was going to say,
Cabaret.
it's so familiar to me.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it was sort of a combination of like the Emcee and Cabaret, and Malcolm McDowell and A Clockwork Orange. I mean, there was a lot of influences going into it, but one of them, that Emcee, was really crafted in this vein. And when we went to produce the original Under the Influence, I wrote that role for me. And we were looking at it, and Rusty's like, "You're not right for this. You have to play the man number 2." I'm like, "But I wrote it.
I won't it.
But I want to play the Emcee."
Ithaca was great.
So yeah, and Brian DeMar Jones, who did the original too, was great. And I agreed. I never thought myself as much of a character actor, and then he made me play character actor, and I'm doing all these different roles, and I wrote. I'm like, oh my god, I wrote a really hard role.
What a juicy part.
Yeah, for a role just called man, and also the role called woman. They're like the hardest parts in the show.
Yeah. So. But then he decides to do Cabaret, and lo and behold, he casts me as the Emcee.
and honestly, we had long discussions. Like, we went through an entire rehearsal process, and I mean an entire audition process, where I was saying to him, I don't think you're right. I don't think you're right. And then all of a sudden, when I was sitting watching people audition, I began to realize, I don't often write out my top 10 list that I want for a character. I think it can be a little limiting, and I just kind of especially when I'm auditioning, like to let the stuff wash over me and just, in the end, go with what stuck. I absolutely, as I sat in those auditions, began to realize that actually this personality is exactly what I needed. This kind of outgoing trickster, this playful, and especially playful sexually. Yeah, there's a puck component to it, absolutely. But there's also and this will be, pretty prevalent in what we're doing. There's a sexual component to the Emcee. Like, one of the things that really inspired me about this piece is our current climate and the idea of safe spaces, because in essence, that's what the Cabaret is in 1930s Germany, is a safe space. But it's not a safe space in the way that we tend to define them, with everyone has consent. This is a very sexualized area, and probably people are being touched without consent, and there's probably people, in this Cabaret.
It's essentially a strip club. I mean.
Yeah, and so we found a lot of, I've found a lot of, inspiration from our local strip scene and some of the burlesque that's been happening, particularly in the funhouse space, but also across town, and some of my friends who've been burlesque. And then a couple of years ago, Kate Mira, who's the one of the founding members of Fuse and is also our artistic ambassador and choreographer for Cabaret, we were over in France, and we were at the Avignon Festival in France performing her solo show, and we went to this late night show. I mean, there's the Avignon Festival is one of those Scotland, Edinburgh festivals. It's constant theater, small little spaces all over the place. And we went to this one cabaret. It was literally, I think it might have even been called Cabaret in a different, language or whatever.
France, it was Cabernet.
Exactly. But and it had this kind of drag MC. It felt very familiar, and it felt like I immediately was like, this is the way Cabaret needs to be done. And so when we chose to do it, I mean, we've been at Funhouse, somewhat out of necessity for the past few years, just simply for scope, size, and also just an ability for people to walk in here and drink. But then I was like, you know what? There's really no place I'd rather do this show.
It feels like environmental theater.
Yeah, it feels like a site-specific environmental work here, and that's one of the things that Fuse is all about, is getting daring audiences to exit that comfort zone of the theater to experience theatrical works.
Why don't you explain what Funhouse looks like for
for
anyone
those
that has not been there?
Currently, we're surrounded with clowns.
That's not a joke.
That's not a nice thing to say about me.
No. Possibly,
present company included.
200 pictures of clowns.
Yeah, we're in
really
what's
cool.
called the Clown Room. And Andy Barrett, who curates this place, this is Andy's pride and joy. It's the Funhouse Lounge is a small cabaret venue. It's got a tiny little cabaret stage, probably too tiny to ever dare to stage a well-known massive musical on, but nonetheless, whatever, what the hell, let's give it a shot. But a small little cabaret type comedy stage. It's red everywhere, red lights. It's very dark. It's very
carnival-esque.
Very carnival. Yeah, it's a crazy little world that you kind of walk into, and it seems like, to me at least, it seems like everything else outside goes away.
Yeah.
It can be a bit triggering if you're afraid of clowns.
Oh,
Honestly,
yeah.
I'm a little uncomfortable right now.
I do want to
The clowns are only in one room. You can avoid them.
I've had a friend who was like, no, I'm not going there. I've heard there's clowns everywhere. No, it's in one room.
Yes.
You don't see it in passing. You
And
have to
There's
seek
probably
out.
100 paintings of clowns.
Yes,
in
and
here.
it's a bit of a phobia Rorschach test. You come in and you pick your creepiest clown. It says a lot about you.
Interesting.
We should
Yeah.
figure out which are.
Oh, I know which one. That one in the mirror with the empty eyes.
Empty
freaks
eyes,
me
yeah,
out.
yeah. Especially when you put your eyes in it, when you position yourself in the mirror. It's a mirror. Never mind, people. This will never make sense. Just come see it.
You have to see it.
So, what kind of challenges does staging the show here face? Like, what do you face?
You're working on a postage stamp
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
So as a director, and it's one of the challenges about
big
this
cast,
place.
too.
It's a huge cast.
How
We
many
only have
people?
one dressing room. We're doing it with 13, so one dressing room. We kind of will adopt the clown room as a dressing room as well, which will save people from some terror. But I mean, I come from a movement background, and so blocking is a huge joy of mine, and so there's a part of that I have to sacrifice to work in this space. Stage pictures are exceptionally challenging to make interesting. It's a very long and narrow stage, so you don't have a lot of depth, and so you can't get a
That's
lot
okay.
of.
Neither do I.
Yeah, truth.
But what I will say,
Hashtag truth.
you directed, if I'm right? You directed Sordid Lives?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. One thing that I loved about that is the same challenges, but and for people who don't know, it's kind of like you can see a little bit of the bar, and then there's all the seating, and then they built up the stage in front. It's really tiny, but the scenes that you set up for Sordid Lives, there's a scene at the bar. They use the bar. They use the space. It's such a great use of space that you guys played with, and it's very environmental.
Yeah.
The audience is sucked in. Oh, we're at the bar. So you don't have a big, vast
You're kind of
stage
forced
to dance
into that.
on,
Yeah,
but
you're forced to. And with this
I'd
show,
say it's advantageous in a way.
I'm hoping so. Let's just.
I think for this particular show, it is. It definitely is. It's just that there is. This show does have what, if you had a giant stage, has some big dance numbers we would do.
Yeah.
Those are the challenging parts.
Yeah, we have to think about choreography and how we do it in this space. Like, there is a mandatory kick line in this show. Maybe two of them, if you really want to get down to it. And those are challenging on this small of a space. I mean, you're literally going to kick people in the face. So we've been talking a lot and discussing the choreography and whatnot about how we can limit the amount of time that everybody's up on stage and actually make more of that about the surround. You know what I mean? You mentioned using the bar. We're definitely going to be using the bar in this one. Can't not use the bar. And there's lots of Kit Kat girls and boys who will be surrounding the audience and again, like think more along the lines of like strip club and burlesque. You at times during the show will have your own private dancer in front of you. And there will obviously be the policy of they can touch you. Our dancers can touch you, but you as audience members
If
cannot
you sit
touch.
in the front
Just
row,
like any good strip
you
club.
automatically are giving consent to be accosted and kicked in the face.
No, nobody's kicking anybody in the face.
Somebody might like that. Don't kink shame.
Yeah, right. No king
Pay
shaming.
extra for those seats.
There are a little bit more on the front row. Yeah, sure. But yeah, we really are attempting to. Again, it's a site-specific work. It's very much the way that we work, and it's along the same lines as when Fuse took Midsummer Night's Dream and we did it out of Bagby Hot Springs. I mean, you just kind of use the world that's around you to help tell the story as much as possible.
Yeah. You guys are you're great at that. I have no qualms. I think it's going to be an amazing show. Can you, now, just briefly, can you talk about the audition process that you had? Because there was such a flurry of interest from everyone that I know personally, to the point where you
I kind
guys
of undermined it a little bit because I suddenly decided I first wasn't going to audition. I'm in the middle of writing a new musical and I wanted to focus on that. I was going to do a reading of it during
You also
the
just
outright.
started your new job.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then I was helping him with the auditions, and I just kind of got attached to it. And then so I was at home, and I just kept putting on costumes and sending him little videos of me doing numbers from the show.
This is honest to God true.
So go for it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Send that director a video.
We were super lucky. I am hesitant of the audition process. I don't really trust it, and I think it's a really false environment to gather people you want to collaborate with. Actors are exceptionally nervous. They're not given a scope of a show or an arc. They're given a few seconds. And if you ever just exhumed 30 seconds of my work from any particular show, I can't guarantee that 30 seconds is brilliant, even though I might have put together 2 hours of a good show.
On the other hand, though, also people come in and sometimes they kick ass and they're amazing, but that's the best they'll ever be.
Yeah, the good
process
auditioners.
It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that?
I tend to work with people who I know.
Yeah.
And I think that we do that a lot in Portland, and I know that there's a real challenge when new actors work their way into town, and Pata's certainly offers an outlet for that. But I get it, and I don't mean to be strictly financial about it, but when you're laying down thousands of dollars to put on a show, I'm just not that willing to take the extreme risk. I say that, but then we go ahead and have auditions for this because I know it's Cabaret, and I know that I don't know, I'm not Broadway Rose, I'm not, at Lakewood. I don't know the great musical actors in town, and I wanted to open it up to them and see who would be interested. And we got well over 75 people to come to the auditions, which was huge for us, and we had to add nights and. And so there's it was amazing. We could have cast the show probably 10 different ways out of what we had, and that became its own why did I do this? Why did I open myself up to this? They're so good.
There was a lot of really good people came in.
Yeah,
I wasn't there for all of them, but the ones I saw.
What kind of things did you see that stood out? People that are listening, they're looking for advice.
My advice, and this is something I wish I knew years ago when I was younger. Be anything but boring. Be anything but boring. Also, learn your song. Don't come up.
Also that.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you're one of these people, it's because you don't know. I'm not judging you, but critically, I would say don't come into an audition and read your song out of a book. That was weird. But yeah, know your material. Sing something that's appropriate for the show and for the we had people that came in great voices, but sang something that from Chess, which is just not
appropriate to the show.
It's just that's great,
that
but where are you going to fit in this show?
Yeah.
You probably have a lot more of that stuff.
Yeah, I'll start very basic. That people need to up their headshots in this town. It doesn't have to be expensive anymore. There are just ways to get better headshots than what we are being presented with, because I am currently still going back and looking at those headshots and sometimes having a hard time remembering who these people were because they didn't look like their headshots. And so I have to go back into my phone and look at the other pictures that we have of them and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and headshots shouldn't be glamorous. They should look like you.
Yeah,
the whole point is so we remember who you are.
Yeah. And it's not difficult. There are lots of people in town, and there are lots of photographers, and there's lots of young photographers and people who are just trying to get going and started who, can help people out. So I would say, number one, get a good headshot.
Yeah.
You know, it is literally the thing you're leaving with us to remind us of you. Preparedness, like I in my audition for Michigan State Marching Band back in the day, the director of bands had a sign above his head that said, "Fail to prepare, then prepare to fail." And I think that's something I've carried with me forever. You can never be too prepared because you're going to walk in, and again, those nerves are going to hit, and all of a sudden, so much of what you have done anyway is going to fly out the door. You need a lot more of that preparation than most people give for auditions. Again, because we think of it and like it's going to be a couple of minutes. You know what I mean? It's such a weird process. I just wish we could like work with people for weeks before we could actually say, come on in, come in and do this.
Something to remember too. Is always remember that the people sitting behind the desk, and I only know this because now I'm behind the desk. I've been doing that more over the past few years than as an audition. We want you to succeed. We're not going to judge anybody, and we know how hard it is. We know how stressful it is, and how much nerves you have. But we're going to help you succeed. We want to see you do your best.
That's so true. So many actors, they feel like the casting director, the people behind the table, are the enemies.
Yeah, no,
but they're not. They want you to
and in the defense of the actors, so many times they present themselves as the enemy.
Yeah.
It's cold. It's unwell. They don't, we're in a place where, as directors on the other side of the table, we don't want to give you false hope either, because that can be crushing. And we know that it can be. But there are ways to make people feel warm and welcome and comfortable in a situation without giving them the sense that they're walking out the door having just won the part either. Yeah. And I think that oftentimes the people on my side of the table, on the directing side of the table, will go too far in the coldness of trying not to give you anything.
It's a difficult balance to make.
Yeah, and even in our discussion, we had one, actually, it was the person who ended up getting the part. Yeah. We had one audition we had many auditions that were phenomenal, but we had one audition that really kind of rocked the room. And at the end of it, people in the room actually applauded the audition. And I had to turn around after the person left, and I'm like, it's super awesome that we wanted to do that, but we can't do that. Like, that gives this weird sense of false hope. Yeah. Thankfully, that was the person who ended up getting the role anyway.
I couldn't not. Yeah. She owned it.
Well, and now we're gendering her. I was trying to keep that specific and non-specific. So, yes.
They owned it.
Bleep it out.
Yeah.
We won't.
Fix it in post. We're not.
So we haven't talked too much about Fuse specifically, and I wanted to give some moments to that.
Sure.
What's Fuse all about? What's its mission statement? How did it start?
Well,
okay.
So number one, most important thing is Fuse is turning 10 years old this year.
Wow.
Yeah. So 10 years is a huge benchmark for all of us, especially considering that when Kate and I took over the company about 8 years ago, we were not in a very good financial situation. On top of that, we had a lease at the old theater with Vertigo and Profile. And so there were we had responsibilities financially. We had literally no money in the bank, negative money in the bank. And all of a sudden we had to figure out how to make this 501c3 fly. And so we each created our solo shows, which is where Kate's solo show that we took to Avignon came from. And Sarah Faye Goldman has created hers. Nick has created his. I created one, which we have since buried, and I will be creating another one here. We're going to try to do a festival of this work in the fall, of these solo shows, because they were so important to us being able to have any sort of longevity. Like, we took those solo shows and we actually made a little bit of money off from them, and slowly but surely, you throw in the outright component into that. Fuse produces outright, so you throw that in there, and all of a sudden, we find ourselves 10 years later in the best financial place we've ever been as a company. Awesome. Yeah, it is. One of my favorite lines. I have lots of favorite lines from Shakespeare, but one of my favorite ones is "Wisely and slow they stumble who run fast," and I witness it so often in theater of people trying to be the hot new thing on the scene. We're the new company, and we want everyone to and all of a sudden we're going to explode, and in 2 years we're going to be hiring. Fuse has never had that model. It is always just, how are we going to maintain ourselves to be here in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years? If that means we don't do 8 shows a year, if that means we do 2 shows a year, if that means, we've always tried to make sure that was at the fore of what we were thinking. And, here we are 10 years into it, and it's the best place we've ever been.
That's a great mindset.
Yeah.
Remember when we were talking about earlier how we compliment each other because he does things well that I don't do? Yeah. That's all that. I can't even balance a checkbook. But one-man shows, I want to do one.
We're trying. We're running out of time, so we want to hear both of your worst. It could be your worst audition story or your worst moment on stage. You pick. Well, who wants to go first?
Go with your. I can. Okay. I would say worst moment on stage was when I was I was playing puck in college, and I was an agile gymnast at the time, or at least much more agile than I am now. And it was a multi-layered set, and I had to do a round off onto one lower level and then back handspring on that same level and then vault myself onto the ground. And I rounded off.
You can't see this, but I'm looking at him going, what?
And I'm looking at him going, bitch. So I had to round off onto the one level, back handspring, and then I over-rotated on the back handspring and went too far, and I missed the layer and slammed down onto the ground, and it was a high school performance at 10 a.m. for all these kids. So there was that moment of complete silence in the theater, and all you hear is the because I had the wind knocked out of me. All you hear is the and then kids die laughing, and then I jump up and I'm like, I'm okay, and I was not okay.
Not okay. Everything hurts and I'm dying.
And I'm dying.
They're merciless.
Yeah. Oh God. Awful moment.
The one audition horrifying moment I can think of was I was in New York before I came here. This was years ago. I was auditioning for the national tour of Into the Woods, and I was auditioning for the Prince, and I had a big pink and white ruffly shirt, and I was just I was going for it, and I had to sing Agony, did I abuse her or show her disdain, why did she run from me? I'm holding my coffee, and the monitor comes in, and she opens the door, and she doesn't hold the door for me, and it flies back, hits my coffee all over my fabulous Prince shirt. And so I'm standing there, and all the people behind the desk. This is when I wish I had the advice. Those people are on your side. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed now. But then I tried to turn it into something funny, so I sang, did I abuse her or show her this stain? Why does she run from me? Still didn't cast me though, but whatever.
Ernie is nothing without his puns.
Well, thank you guys so much for being on the show. We're so excited to see Cabaret. We're excited for the growth of your company.
Yeah, 10 years. That's amazing. Are you planning some kind of a...
We will with
it's called Cabaret.
We're trying to let Cabaret live within Outright in its own kind of evolution as well. The celebration will be actually on our 10-year, closer to our 10-year anniversary, which is October 8th, I believe.
Nice.
So that will be the solo shows will kind of be the celebration of that.
When does Cabaret open?
April. We have a preview. May 17th. Thank you. We have a preview May 17th, and then we open officially on the 18th, and we run for 3 weekends. Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. We do have one matinee on the... What's that?
Where can people find tickets?
Boxofficetickets.com, and they will go live April 1st.
Nice.
April 1st. Boxofficetickets.com, and do they search through Cabaret, or would they just search a Funhouse?
If you just search Cabaret, you can do that. If you want to search Fuse Theatre Ensemble, you can do that. I'm pretty certain that if you search Cabaret, it's all geared towards your location anyway. Perfect. So we will likely come up as one of your first choices anyway. And once the actual link goes live, we'll start posting that direct link to all of our Facebook. Cool. Like us on Facebook, Fuse Theatre Ensemble, and the Outright Theatre Festival. Exactly.
Thanks, guys.
And don't tell me that you didn't know about the show.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you. Nice. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We appreciate what you guys are doing too as well. I mean, there was a void in this community for this sort of... Stop it. Just stop now.
A gaping hole. He's been avoiding that phrase all day.
There's a void in our community for this sort of work, and I really appreciate that you guys are getting out there and doing this.
And you planted a seed in that gaping hole. It's going to grow,
I hate you. Let's end on that. I hate him.
And that's our show.
Make sure to go to boxofficetickets.com to buy tickets to Cabaret.
If you liked this episode, please share it with your friends. Like us on Facebook. Give us a good rating on iTunes. Subscribe
Yes,
to our
especially
YouTube channel.
iTunes.
Especially iTunes.
And if you want to be interviewed on the podcast or find out more info about us, go to www.communitytheaterheroes.com.